and it's my honor to be with you today and chair a very topical panel on organized crime in Southeast Asia, trafficking in drugs, arms, persons, and wildlife goods. But before diving into the discussion, I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, and especially Dr. Vargas and Nadia for the invitation and for the organization of the excellent event. The main focus of our panel today is basically to discuss the challenges and opportunities for law enforcement against trafficking of human beings and wildlife in Southeast Asia. The topics we're going to cover today are also very close to my area of expertise, and I'm very much looking forward to the interventions of my co-panelists. I'm a data protection specialist at Europol, and Europol is the EU law enforcement agency or police cooperation here in The Hague. I'm daily working towards ensuring compliance of highly complex law enforcement operations with applicable data protection frameworks and legal provisions. So my work is very much in the intersection between oversight and compliance with fundamental rights. I'm very much looking forward to the interventions of my co-panelists, especially their focus on geopolitical and socioeconomic factors that contribute to the rise of organized crime in Southeast Asia, which is also an area outside my direct scope of operation and expertise. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you our first panelist, Mr. Chad Patrick Osorio, who is going to explore risk-based legal strategies in combating transnational environmental harms in the ASEAN. Just a short introduction, Chad, if you allow me. Chad is a PhD researcher at Wageningen University under the Environmental Economics and Natural Resources and Law Chair groups. He is concurrently adjacent assistant professor, School of Environmental Science and Management, and senior lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Philippines, Los Banos. Chad contributes to a number of international projects and publications, including the Yale Global Justice Program, the German Commission for UNESCO's Fair Culture Journal, the Oxford Graduate Inequality Review, the Asia-Pacific Yearbook of International Humanitarian Law, and the Belgrade Encyclopedia of Global Security Studies, among others. His research focuses primarily on the intersections of environmental and social justice, transnational harms, and artificial intelligence policy. So, Chad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Faisla. I hope you guys don't mind that I will be walking around because I'm nervous and I can't walk around when I'm nervous. So my name is Chad and I work in intersections. I work in intersections of economics and law in particular. And I do that with a lot of different things from different policies. And really it's all about applying economics and the law in order to better create policies. And as an environmentalist, I work a lot with something very close to my heart. And which is, well, something very much against my heart, which is environmental crimes. Next, please. So today I'm going to be talking to you briefly about costs, compliance, and harm and crime. And we're talking about risk-based legal strategies. So I will be taking 12 minutes of your time to discuss this very brief paper, and hopefully we can talk about all of the questions afterwards. So when we talk about cost, compliance, and crime, we're talking about transnational environmental harms. And these harms, they're myriad, especially when it comes to ASEAN. We can talk about transboundary haze or illegal electronic waste, marine plastic pollution, and of course waste smuggling. So the two things which are very much relevant to the discussion today would also be the illicit timber trade and the illegal wildlife trade, which is the focus of my PhD in Wageningen. So we want to discuss this, to limit this in scope to the ASEAN region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, because we also recognize that in smaller groups, it's a lot easier to negotiate compared to trying to figure out what to do with a bigger group. So for example, the UNCLOS took so many years to create, whereas, well, relatively smaller multilateral agreements are easier to push forth compared to larger multilateral agreements. So here we discuss the concept of crime reduction in the ASEAN. So as a brief introduction, this entire conference is all about the ASEAN, 10 countries with 2 additional observer status. And what we want to discuss here is how do we prevent environmental harms? How do we improve the incentive and disincentive mechanisms against these harms which are borderless? So far, we have analyzed the legal landscape of ASEAN. We've identified the laws being used to target transnational environmental harms. And what do we notice? So first, a lot of these laws are actually based on constitutional rights. So human rights, environmental rights, but also all about civil law. So these are damages, these are cases on torts, these are compensation cases. Unfortunately, in the general scheme of things, there's not a lot of, well, there are a lot of discussions, but there's not much on how criminal justice could properly be utilized. So, why criminal justice, we may ask? Well, there are so many different ways by which we can ensure environmental compliance. And criminal justice is just one of them. But then here we say that first, environmental harms are public harms. So when we say that, we mean that in torts cases, for example, we usually need a civil person, someone who will file a case against someone else in order for a case to prosper. But then environmental harms are normally public harms, which means that it should not require a specific private actor in order to be able to file cases against them. The second thing is, well, deliberate, long-term, and foreseeable damages, and then punishment adds more burdensome consequences than mere compensation alone, which is going to be the focus of our discussion today. And also, if criminal proceedings do not meet the evidentiary threshold that that criminal law provides, then we could still have the possibility for compensation under civil law. So it does not necessarily negate the potential for civil liability, even if we file for criminal justice, or even if we fight for environmental criminal justice. Next, please. Okay, sure, that's great, that sounds great. Why don't we just criminalize everyone who harms the environment? That's the easiest thing, right? But here we see, and this is where our point is, where what we want to highlight, is that it's not just about criminalization. It's not just about throwing everyone who harms the environment into jail or pushing them in fines. It's also about optimal criminalization. And what does that mean? Well, 2 prongs. First of all, what if there's too little criminalization? And what if it's too much criminalization? So too little criminalization results, for example, in ineffective laws. So, for example, highly organized environmental actors, and we know, for example, the work of the Wildlife Justice Commission does a lot of that. And we see also in other big actors, they do not respond to just civil liability because they can simply pay off whatever civil liability they've been imposed. The second one also is that especially in cases of corruption, and this we see in a lot of trafficking cases, especially working with customs officials or other border control officers, it's optimal to use non-monetary penalties. And all the studies which are related to this are also in the slide, which I can share with you later on. But also, interestingly, many environmental legislation lack criminal justice mechanisms. Sure, it says, okay, but we should punish, but then it does not necessarily create a big body of laws which we can actually use effectively. But also, we highlight that while we want criminalization, we also might not want too much criminalization. Why so? Well, one thing which, and this is also in a study that we have recently published, too much criminalization can actually result to not only environmental harms because of unintended consequences. So that what happens is that, for example, when people were criminalizing harms against wildlife, people actually started fighting back against wildlife even further because they feel why is the government not protecting our rights and they're protecting their rights? So especially when there's no enforcement mechanism, they're not going to, they go against what the law intended them to. And it fails to address complex human dimensions, for example, again, poverty, social inequality, violations of human rights, and can further encourage illegal behavior. So, okay, so how do we find the balance now? I'm a very solutions-oriented person, and I hope I think everyone in the room here is too, because we're here, and we want to not just talk about big words like, balance and whatever. It's always about finding solutions to real problems. And one of the things that we can do is identify how we can design these policies in order to use, well, behavioral economics, psychology, the rational mind, and the rational actions of businesses in order to potentially optimize criminalization. And so here we present a model of efficient punishment. So in this model comes from an economic analysis of law model. So economic analysis of law is a study of the law which looks not only at what people ought to do or what people should do, but it also looks at how people act in response to laws and how they adjust their behavior. For example, if a punishment is too high, then what happens is that people will not do whatever bad thing it is, right? Yes or no? What do you think? Yes, ideally. In the ideal world, yes. But then, the thing is, do people always get caught? So that's the thing. That's something that we have to understand. And this is the model that we're looking at. So for example, as the seriousness of the crimes increase, the severity of the prescribed legal punishment also increase. That's an ideal scenario. If you, for example, ship waste to a country and the damages are 5 million, then you should pay for the damages cost plus all the costs involved. And that is the model of civil liability. Whatever you pay, you will have to do. However, the challenge is the prescribed legal punishment, if you want to take criminal law into action, it must be higher than perfect disgorgement. So perfect disgorgement is like the penalty is equal to the crime, but then we want legal punishment to be higher than perfect disgorgement. So you can see the blue line right over there. That's legal punishment. Why? So that people will not commit these behaviors. So otherwise, criminals would risk committing more crimes as their penalty would be equivalent to the amount of damage they can cause. If I can pay for this, and the risk of it is getting low, then why should I even bother? Because at the end of the day, if I commit this crime 10 times and I only get caught once or twice, then say if I have 500,000 every shipment and then I only get caught twice, I would still pay 5 million. I would still get 5 million and I would still lose only 100,000. So at the end of the day, I still win. So this is what we want to highlight here in this particular paper. What we want to do is that when we talk about designing penalties, it's not only about just increasing the penalties. It's also about increasing the chances of getting caught. And those are three things. It's a function of apprehension, meaning that people should get caught. But not only that, but wait, there's more. We have to also look at the chances of getting prosecuted, and we also have to look at the chances of getting convicted. So this particular equation can ideally help our legislators from different jurisdictions, whether it be in Europe or in Africa or in Asia, in order to properly craft a criminal justice mechanism to prevent environmental harm. So that's the general idea behind it. So it is flexible in a way that it takes into account these various rates of success, but at the same time, it also can be applicable to everyone. Now, yes, please. So now, if we increase the punishment as well as the increased effort, what we see here is that the red line, which is the expected punishment, would ideally move towards becoming the blue line. Okay, so is everyone still okay? Yeah, I'm trying to explain this. I know a lot of people become lawyers because we don't like math. But then, I'm sorry, bear with me, but at least hopefully the idea is there, right? So we have to increase the punishment, but also increase the chances of people getting actually punished for the harms that they do. So now, so what? Why am I talking about this in an ASEAN setting? What's so important about the ASEAN anyway? Well, aside from being the fifth largest regional organization in the world in terms of economic power, it also has a number of maritime and land boundaries which are very prone to these transnational environmental harms. And this is important because one crime can continue from one jurisdiction to another jurisdiction. And this is the importance of having a harmonized legal framework criminalizing transnational environmental harms. So this is a very tricky thing, especially considering that ASEAN has the no interference principle. But then there are already ways by which people, like for example, there's the ASEAN ministerial meetings on transnational crimes, and they already include two environmental crimes, which is wildlife and timber. Now the next goal is maybe to help them consider all the other environmental crimes more. The second thing is transnational arrest warrants and expedited extraditions. Sounds like how do you say it? A tongue twister, right? Transnational arrest warrants and expedited yes. So this is important because when you have all of these things, it increases the chances that transnational actors who commit these harms beyond borders can actually be punished if people actually start working together. And these are things which do not necessarily require overhauling the entire ASEAN criminal justice framework. These are treaties, or these can be multilateral treaties, which can be a step-by-step way towards actually finding a freaking solution against these transnational environmental harms. Another thing which we also published earlier this year is the tax, social welfare, and anti-corruption bodies, because we need to look at other ways, other branches of the law, in order to figure out what the heck is wrong with our environmental harms. So for example, tax laws can be used actually in AMLA. So best example is, what's his name? It's not Robert De Niro. This guy, the mafia guy, who got Al Pacino. Robert De Niro. So Al Pacino?
Yeah.
Al Pacino is the actor, no?
Yeah.
No, not Al Pacino. This guy, so he's mafia, basically. No, not Godfather. I will come back, I will Google him. So what happened was that the FBI could not pin down the crimes against him. So what they did to incarcerate him was they used tax laws in order to pin him down. And that's a lot easier to prove. So right now, in the paper last published also earlier this year, we said, okay, let's use tax laws instead of, just looking at it from the purely environmental perspective. And of course, specialized environmental prosecution teams. I realize I'm 2 minutes over time. It's 14 minutes already. Okay, so at the end of the day, what do I want everyone to remember, or at least not remember, just think about? Well, environmental harms is a very challenging problem. So it has a lot of different factors, but it's important to also do a whole of systems approach. Well, criminal justice is one tool. It's not the only tool, but we also need to properly use it. It's like having a knife, and we have to cook, but we don't use it properly, or the knife is dull. We need to sharpen this knife in order to properly cook the best dish that we can, given all the materials that we have. And again, of course, whoever can recite this in Latin, nullum sine lege, there's no crime, and therefore no penalty when there's no law punishing it. This is the reason why we want criminal justice, but also we have to balance it with human rights, with environmental rights, with the interests of each and every one of us involved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. A really interesting intervention. trying to avoid using organized legal frameworks and promoting criminal sanctions for environmental harm as public harm. And also the point that you made with regard to criminal justice mechanism to prevent environmental crime. And in this regard, I want to ask you about your views on basically how organized groups exploit weaknesses in the region of legislation or regulation in Southeast Asia.
Thank you very much, Faisal. I think this is the perfect question. If you want someone dead, right? You ask them about transnational organized crime and how they're exploiting legislation. There are so many ways that transnational organized crime. So I think from the perspective of wildlife, there are already examples, and I think Lisa would be able to further speak on this. But for example, for waste smuggling, which is trans-border crime, they have literally mafias, and they use the same trade routes, for example, in smuggling drugs, as the same trade routes in smuggling wildlife, as the same trade routes in smuggling illegal in persons, which Jenny would also be able to further talk about. So there's so many ways, and unfortunately, it sucks because they're really smart, and we're not being very smart, and we're not working together. These people are working together. The human traffickers are working together with the wildlife traffickers or with the drug traffickers. I think also we should all work together and contribute from different aspects of law and different perspectives also, different fields, in order to solve these harms, not only to the environmental harms, but also human rights harms. I hope that answers briefly your question.
Yes, certainly does. Thank you, Jack. We're going to move now to our next panelist, who is Ms. Jenny Maria Doan. Jenny is going to talk about the Aegean responses in tackling trafficking in persons for the purpose of forced criminality. Jenny is the Senior Aegean Program Coordinator at the Aegean Australia Counter-Trafficking Program. She manages various regional cooperation with Aegean stakeholders in formulating policies and capacitating regional and national counterparts to address trafficking persons. She provides technical support for the development of Aegean multi-sectoral work plan against trafficking in persons 2023-2028. And Jenny is also a graduate with LLB from University of Indonesia in 2011 and started her career as a corporate lawyer in a first-year firm in Indonesia. She joined Aegean Secretariat as legal officer in 2017 before moving to Aegean Act in 2020. So Jenny, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So I will be speaking about the forced criminality in the context of trafficking in persons, slightly concerning issues just like Chad has discussed earlier about the wildlife. Next slide, please. So I bet some of you know, but this is just a brief introduction on what is trafficking in persons. Trafficking in persons involves three elements. The first is the act, as you can see here, and then the means and the purpose. Act is the number of occurrence that involve in this process: the recruitment, transport, transfer, harboring, and receipt of persons. Only one element of act itself already constitutes trafficking. And then we have means. It is important to note that there is use of force, threat, fraud, and also deception and abduction and abuse of power. And then the purpose. We have so many purposes in trafficking. They are exploited for sexual purpose, forced labor, slavery, removal of organs, and other types of exploitation. It is also important to note that in the cases of trafficking involving children, the element of means should not be considered because they do not have that consent. Next slide, please. Okay. And then we move on to the forced criminality. This is like forced criminality has been going on, but the recent years have seen so many cases of forced criminality, specifically in Southeast Asian region. Trafficking for forced criminality is exploitation in criminal activities. It is trafficking for the purpose of exploitation of victims through forcing or otherwise compelling them to commit criminal acts for economic or other gains of traffickers or exploiters. This new trend, there is a specific aspect of how they profit from this forced criminality. First, they will involve the victims in scamming activities. They will ask them to gather more people to be scammed and then to get money from them. There's also the element of extortion. So people got scammed, got trafficked into compounds, and in order for them to be released, they need to pay some money. So their family will pay for the release. And then there's selling of victim. So this victim of trafficking, they are trafficked into the online scamming compound and then being sold again to another compound. Next slide. Okay, this is the next slide is about the main drivers, about the forced criminality. Of course, it is because of the rise of the COVID pandemic. As we know, the pandemic bring out like the best of us in using technology. It is also the same with the transnational organized syndicate. It allows them to explore how to use this technology in order to gain more profit. And then the advancement of technology, it allows them to recruit people online using cryptocurrency, using Bitcoin, using social media, TikTok, Instagram, WhatsApp, and then they will do that to online criminal activities such as online scamming, love scamming, and then also online gambling. The expansion of transnational organized syndicates in the region. We have seen increase of organized syndicates in the region, specifically from the Chinese tycoon and also from the Taiwanese. There's also economic factors due to the increased unemployment rate, inflation, limited employment opportunities in the country of origin. And it is also important to note the shifting of regional political security situation, like we know in Myanmar. It caused to be they have less employment opportunities, and it made more younger people to get scammed. And there's also intersectionality with other crimes between trafficking and money laundering, corruption, and collusion. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the new pattern of forced criminality for the victim profile. But the old conception of trafficking was the uneducated, the slightly older people, those coming from the village. But in this new pattern, we have seen younger and younger people get scammed, get trafficked, 18 from 30. And then higher level of education, high school graduates, university graduates, fresh graduates, and they also they are a very daily user of technology, they are tech savvy, and they are multilingual speakers. In the country profile, we have seen that there is a shift from country of origin and country of destination in the Southeast Asia region. What used to be country of origin become country of destination. For example, Laos, Myanmar, and the Philippines. And this new pattern denotes they use the border area, special economic zones, vacation towns. They use these areas because this is quite a gray area in terms of jurisdiction and for the law enforcement, so they build compounds in this area. And then the recruitment practices, how they use the social media, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter even, and how they encourage family members and friends to recruit their own family and friends into the online scheme. And we have also seen cases about the false internship. This is actually happening in Indonesia. There are a lot of number of university students who got trafficked due to false promises of internship in Germany. And then there's also, of course, kidnapping, this is like the usual pattern of trafficking. And then the reselling of victims, like from one compound to another compound, so they just being trafficked more and more. On the exploitation, as I mentioned before, there's online scamming, online gambling, love scamming. So you you get them to make Tinder account and everything, and then it will end up like investment fraud. This is also what we call big budget. And there's a voluntary scamming. Voluntary scamming, it's like at the first time they are forced to do online scamming, they were trafficked, and then they were asked to do online scamming. and then they are rescued by the government, but then they come back again because it is easy money for them. And there's not much employment opportunities in their country of origin, so it is easier for them to get that kind of money. Next slide. Okay, this is just a sample of how we're recruiting people. This is, for example, for the Filipino. This is just this is from the program that I'm working in ASEAN Act. So we did this assessment on how the online scamming happened in Laos, in Mobile. And this is happened for the Filipino workers. So if you ever encounter any Facebook posting or Instagram about marketing or online support or customer service in this area, you need to be very careful. Okay, next slide. Yeah, this is the online scam fraud and situation. As you can see here, this is the concentrated one. People can come not only from
Oh, nice. It's too fancy.
yeah, so you can see people come not only from the region, but outside the region. This is the largest part of the China, and then we have here from the African continent, even from Brazil. Oh my God, so how? This,
I'll get it back.
okay.
We'll just sort it.
Yeah. So they are trafficked not only from the region, but outside the region. Bangladesh is also, we have seen a number of Bangladesh victims, Nepal also. And as you can see here, this is the location of the compounds. They are concentrated actually in more or less these countries: Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and the Philippines. Next slide. Yeah. This is also another point that I want to make. The compounds located mostly in the border areas. You can see here. This is between Myanmar and Thailand, and then Myanmar and Laos. And then we have Thailand and Cambodia. Cambodia and Laos is also interesting because they have special economic zone in this area. Jurisdiction issue is quite relevant, so it affects how they are processing this crime. Next slide. This is just some highlights about how the situation has been going on in the region. We have seen how Chinese officials being detained in our PR for the Golden Triangle gambling hub. This is Golden Triangle is the special economic zone. It also happened in Cambodia. And then in the Philippines, we have rescued from the Love Scam Center. Next slide. This is, there's a new release from the UNODC about how transnational organized crime operated in the region, how billion-dollar cyber fraud industry has expanded by using new technologies. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to the regional responses.
Do you want me to go forward?
So, what is the gaps and challenges in responding to the trafficking into online scam? The first is on the victim support. We have gaps in formal identification process. It is very hard to do victim identification in trafficking, even the one without forced criminality. So, in forced criminality, especially in online scamming, it is quite much more difficult because sometimes it is not clear whether they are recruited as victim willingly or not. And there are some countries that did not recognize people that being trafficked into online scamming as victim of trafficking. This is also complicated the situation. And then we have unclear guidance on victim repatriation. There is no, because there's a shifting between the country of origin to and country of destination. This affects how this country of origin repatriate the victim that were found in their country. They do not have clear guidance on how to do that. And then the prosecution of victim. This is mostly happen in transnational organized crime because they are quite sophisticated and technologically advanced. It is hard to prosecute them. It is hard to dismantle their organization. So the next best thing that that some people can do is usually go after people that easier. So that's why we have seen cases where victims are being prosecuted instead of being rescued and support. And then, of course, the ratio of voluntary scamming victims, people who are willingly to come back again to the online scamming compound because of this money. On the investigation and prosecution of the crime, we have gaps in understanding trafficking and its intersectionality with other crimes. This has happened mostly with cybercrimes. There's a blurred lines between trafficking and cybercrimes, and how in some countries, trafficking into forced criminality is categorized as cybercrime. That means it's different support and protection for the victim, different treatment, and basically different investigation and prosecution processes. There is also inconsistent interpretation of trafficking among police, prosecutors, and judges. This is very, very common, even in the old pattern of trafficking, and more so in the new pattern. Especially with the forced criminality, there are not every law enforcement agency are equipped in understanding forced criminality. There is why there's so many inconsistent interpretation of trafficking in this regard. There's also regulatory gaps in special economic zone, as I mentioned before, in this border area, because they are designated as a special economic zone. They have more or less different jurisdiction, much more relaxed regulation. That's why sometimes the law enforcement officers are quite reluctant to go after them. And then challenges in evidence collection and identifying perpetrators. In regards to evidence collection, we have seen the difficulties in using digital evidence. The definition of the digital evidence in each country is different, and how they are used and recognized are also different. This is it becomes more complicated when it is in online scamming, because most evidence will be digital. Next slide, please. Okay. Before we go to the recommendation, this is just an overall overview of what is the regional responses. First is we have to understand how ASEAN structured its mechanism to address security matters. As Chad already mentioned before, we have AMTC. This is the main body in political security cooperation. ASEAN Ministerial Meeting on Transnational Crime. And then we have this one is, this is basically just a forum, ASEAN Regional Forum. So there's no governing bodies or everything. This is the SOMTC, the one that Chad also mentioned before, Senior Official Meeting on Transnational Crime. This senior official meeting reported back to the ministerial meeting. They have 9 working groups. They have trafficking, counterterrorism, cybercrime, arms smuggling, illicit trafficking, wildlife and timber, and general transnational crime matters. And then we have the GICM. This is for the custom matters. Directorate General of Inspection and Custom Matters, if I'm not mistaken. So under SOMTC, we have specifically on trafficking, we have a working group on trafficking. This working group report to SOMTC, and then SOMTC report to the IMDC, who meet annually. I forgot, either during the ASEAN Summit or different. And then we have NAR. This is National Active Representative. This is a newly established mechanism. This is aimed to mainstreaming what has been going on at the national level, and make sure what is going on at the regional is transposed at the nation. And then we have HSU. This is heads of specialized unit in trafficking. These two, NRF and HSU, they report to working group on Hague. Next slide. We also have some key stakeholders. In the ASEAN bodies and entities, we have ICHAR. This is for the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. It is a specialized body under ASEAN. It's a separate entity. And we have ACWC, ASEAN Commission on the Promotion of the Rights of Women and Children. We have CACJ, Council of ASEAN Justices, and like Europol, we have ASEANAPOL. Probably different. And then other international organizations concerning trafficking, we have IOM, UNODC. Bali process is a different mechanism. I think it is under IOM, but it's specialized for trafficking and smuggling of migrants. And then we have OHCHR and ILO. The other key stakeholders, we have ASEAN dialogue partners, for example, like Australia. They're very invested in ASEAN. That's why we have ASEAN-Australia Counter Trafficking, who has been in the region working with the ASEAN partners for more than 15 years, specific for trafficking. We also have regional and national CSOs in the region. Next slide. Okay, this is the ASEAN documents on trafficking. You can see here the first one is the ASEAN Convention. Okay, I forgot. That's so tech savvy. In 2015, we have ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. This is in the context of political security cooperation. There are only 2 ASEAN conventions. The first one is on the trafficking, the other one is on terrorism. That's the only transnational crime that apparently world convention for ASEAN at the moment. And then this convention has been into force in 2017. And then also in 2017, we have the multi-sectoral work plan for 3 years, 2017 to 2020. This work plan is needed because trafficking is a multi-sectoral problem. It needs not only SOMTC as the one handling transnational matters, but also like ICHAR in terms of human rights, ACWC in terms of protection of women and children, and other sectoral bodies. In 2023, our program also had the opportunity to assist ASEAN in making this multi-sectoral work plan. We did it in 2023 due to the pandemic. Also, in the past, since last year, we have a really good development in terms of commitment on how to combat online scamming. In ASEAN, as most of you know, they're not big on hard law. As much as we can, we will use soft law just to firm the commitment, but not committing. So in 2023, we have ASEAN Leaders Declaration on combating trafficking in person caused by the use of technology. We also have Labuan Bajo Declaration on advancing law enforcement cooperation and combating transnational crime. We call it Labuan Bajo because the ASEAN Summit was held in Labuan Bajo, Indonesia. That's why Labuan Bajo Declaration. In 2024, we have Vientiane Declaration on enhancing law enforcement cooperation against online job scams. Again, it's called Vientiane Declaration because it's in Laut Pilar. And then we have ASEAN Declaration on the prevention of child labor, including the elimination of worst forms of child labor. Okay, what else has been done? That's in terms of the regional. In addition to those key documents, we have seen a number of regional capacity building for frontliners, law enforcement agencies, and CSO by ASEAN-related entities. So not only SOMTC, but also we have ICHAR, ACWC. And then we have development of regional guidelines and training resources by ASEAN. At the moment, for example, there are 2 guidelines that are being developed. One is on the non-punishment principle, and the other one is on child and forced marriages. We also seen the number of bilateral police-to-police cooperation in the region, both formal and informal ways. We have also supporting, for example, in my program, we have supporting the ASEAN member states in strengthening international legal cooperation by using the ASEAN forgot what's that. Legal assistance, mutual legal assistance treaty. Okay. And then we have also seen cooperation between the prosecutors and judicial agencies. For example, like I think Judge Cynthia mentioned it before, we have knowledge exchange between the Indonesia and the Philippines on how to advancing victim-sensitive adjudication in trafficking matters. We have also seen increased engagement of CSOs and partners. Next slide. Now, with what have been done in the region, we can still see that we understand there are a lot of efforts, but it might not be enough in addressing online scamming, but at least it is there. We already started doing something to responding to this threat. That's why on the recommendation side for the victim support area, it is important that victim identification should start as immediate as possible. Screening of victims should start once they are rescued, without any delay or whatsoever. And it is also important that support and protection for victims are given without even having formal identification. They have to be treated as presumed victim of trafficking, and they are entitled to support and protection and assistance without even asking them to participate in the criminal justice process. It is also recommended that regional guidance for trafficking indicators of online scamming is developed, because at the moment there's I know UNODC has issued a key indicators on trafficking into online scamming, but it will be important if the ASEAN member state can endorse this kind of document or make their own, so that they have a uniform approach on how to detect and indicate what is trafficking. It is also important to note that CSO play a really big role as frontliners. Sometimes victims rely on NGOs instead of law enforcement officers. So it is important that these CSOs and NGOs are being part of victim screening. On the victim repatriation, of course, we need to update domestic repatriation process, especially due to the shifting of country profile from the country of destination to country of origin. And it is also necessary to have bilateral SOPs for the referral mechanism. So once victim is rescued, they can be referred to the specific agencies in their home country that can provide support and protection for them. They can also leverage on the use of HSU for the informal support. HSU mechanism itself was established to allow police to police cooperation in an informal manner, so they can provide like a life report, life support, life assistance every time there's a case. On the prosecution of victim, it is important to apply a non-punishment principle for the victim. They should not be punished for crimes or any illegal activities that they did not consent to. And then we have to exempt any presumed victim from any penalties and detention, despite the lack of formal identification. For the rescue of voluntary scamming victims, we need to apply the same principle of support and protection as if they are involuntary or trafficked without their own knowledge. We also need to exempt or even consider lower penalties for any misconduct. It is also important to have bilateral arrangement to ensure their integration process in the country of origin. Next slide. For the investigation and prosecution of crime, on the knowledge gaps, it is really one of the big issues in addressing online scamming, because the limitation of resources and funding in the region has made it much more difficult for all of the law enforcement agencies in the whole region to have same understanding. So it is important to transpose whatever international and regional practices that they have agreed on into the domestic context. It has that's why translation and domestic context is important, so they can contextualize what has been agreed at the international and regional level. We also need to conduct bilateral and regional knowledge exchange because it is important for each practitioners, its judiciary officers, prosecutors, police to understand what has been going on in other countries, so they can have some understanding on how to rescue victims, protect them, and how to address the crime. Again, it is also recommended to strengthen the HSU. The inconsistent interpretation among law enforcement, of course, we need to have integrated capacity building among the agencies. So not only on one agencies, but it has to be an integrated, multi-sectoral approaches. We also need to develop SOPs or guidance in dealing with TIP victims. And whenever there's a lack of national legal framework or unclear legal practices, they can opt for regional policies. In regards to the special economic zones, it is actually very important for the home countries to strengthen their domestic law in the jurisdiction of SEZ. They can also have joint operation with the neighboring countries in case they are not confident enough to go after the perpetrators in this special economic zone. On the evidence collection, we can leverage the use of ASEAN AMLAT and assisting evidence gathering from one country to another. We can also develop a regional framework on the recognition and use of digital evidence to bridging the gaps between on the domestic inconsistency of what is digital evidence in each country. We also can develop regional or bilateral guidance on evidence collection in online scale. This will be my last slide. This is just a special recommendation on regional cooperation. We have two importance declaration last year and this year, and it is important that the ASEAN member states hopefully can follow up on this. The first one on the ASEAN Leaders Declaration on combating trafficking in person caused by the abuse of technology. We need to have a regional referral mechanism guideline. It has to have a minimum standard of protection at the regional level for victims of the IP. This is to bridging the gaps of different legal frameworks in each countries and also different policies and different commitment from the countries. Also, it is also important that we follow up on the conduct on research of typologies and trends of the use of technology in TIP cases, and effective partnership and collaboration, not only among the government officials, but also the whole of society approach, government, private sectors, and CSOs. Another important declaration this year on enhancing law enforcement cooperation against online job scams. We need to understand the prevalence and characteristics and patterns of these recruitment frauds. That's why we need to have a strong research in order to develop policy guidelines. We need to also disseminate this finding to the public and relevant authorities, because if they are not disseminated, nobody knows and nobody really cares how it will be used. So it's really important on the dissemination. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. It's been extremely interesting, and I think this one. I can also go ahead without the mic, I suppose. Yes. Thank you. It's been extremely interesting. I have many questions for you, actually. Listening to you, you made me think about also intersections between what your work there and what we're actually doing here in Europe and in Europe as well in this regard. But what I think is very important is what you stress throughout the presentation is that Basically, it's very important to understand the regional and global demand that drives this particular crime area in order to be able to tackle it. And in this regard, I would start, I will ask you just one question, and it's basically countries of police cooperation. You got me hooked up with the point of contact on Asian ball. So I would like to ask about the powers that Asian ball has. Does it have law enforcement powers? Or the idea of Asian ball is more like a secure ball to support national states in their efforts towards tackling this particular crime area?
Thank you. I think for Asianapol, they really have limited authorities. I don't know how about Europol, but they're focusing on cooperation, so providing platform for formal and informal cooperation among police to police, including for like, I think they have this like WhatsApp group if they want to use it among the police, between countries or in all the region. But they do not have the power for like Interpol. I don't think they have that. They don't. They cannot like enforcing their powers and also wait. Check on. Okay, they cannot. They cannot detain people or like
So it's more like a cooperation.
only limited on the cooperation.
Support in investigation.
Correct. And it's based on request.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Jill. It's been very useful. I think I am loud enough even without it. But I will move now to our next speaker. And I'm very happy to introduce to you Ms. Lisa Hague. Lisa is going to talk about tackling transnational wildlife crime in Southeast Asia. She's going to concentrate on law enforcement strategy and cooperative solutions. Lisa is the Director of External Relations and Communication at the Wildlife Justice Commission. In this role, Lisa leverages the Wildlife Justice Commission's expertise and insights from their on-the-ground operations to raise awareness and build political will at a global and multilateral level. Lisa's efforts focus on sharing recommendations to elevate the importance given to wildlife crime, including in the broader context of environmental crime, and enhance the effectiveness of governmental responses. Ms. Harkeveld chairs the United Nations Conventions Against Corruption, UN-CAC Coalition, working group on environmental crime and corruption, and serves also as a vice chair of the board of the Alliance of NGOs on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. Impressive. Lisa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me speak here today at this conference, and well, for organizing this very important conference, and for having a panel on that. So, I'd like to, maybe next slide already. Just an overview of my presentation. I'd like to start off my presentation first by introducing the issue of wildlife trafficking to you, explain a bit about the Wildlife Justice Commission's work, and the relevant international legal framework more at the multilateral level, while we've heard more about the regional level. And I'd also like to tell you a bit about the challenges and opportunities we see for law enforcement against wildlife trafficking by showcasing some case studies of our own work in collaborating with law enforcement in Southeast Asia. I'm quick on the slides. So, the illegal exploitation of wild flora and fauna, as you'll know, is destroying our planet's biodiversity. Vulnerable species are being trafficked to the point of extinction, while criminals make billions from illegal sales. We are at risk of of losing 2 million species in the coming years. So think your rhinos, pangolins, tigers, and turtles. I'd also like to highlight, I know this conference is about Southeast Asia, but, and it's been mentioned also by Chad, wildlife trafficking is a global issue. So think of glass eels trafficking in Europe, for example, big cats in South America, turtles and bears in North America, and rhinos, elephants, and pangolins in Africa. Moving on to Southeast Asia, still the previous slide, but okay. Moving on to Southeast Asia, which, as all of you probably know, it's a fantastic biodiversity hotspot with so many beautiful species. Unfortunately, the region is also a global hotspot for poaching, trafficking, and consumption of endangered species. In the wildlife trafficking supply chain, it is a source, a transit, and a consumer region. Southeast Asia is also the entryway into China, which is the world's largest consumer market for illegal wildlife products, and other consumer countries in Asia, such as Japan. According to a 2019 report on wildlife trafficking in Southeast Asia by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, the region is estimated to account for more than 25% of the global illegal wildlife trade. For example, when it comes to the illegal tiger trade, our investigations have identified numerous organized criminal networks operating in Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam that supply the entire spectrum of this trade. These countries play a central role in supplying the demands of the illegal tiger trade throughout Southeast Asia. Now, the consequences of illegal wildlife trade reach beyond biodiversity. It weakens the rule of law, accelerates climate change, and threatens human health, among other things. 3/4 of all emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic diseases, and Southeast Asia has been identified as a major zoonotic hotspot. 50% of all wildlife markets in the greater Mekong region lie in areas which harbor at least 76 known zoonoses in the wild terrestrial mammal reservoirs. This is from a WWF finding. Next slide, please. So wildlife crime, which incorporates terrestrial, marine, and timber trafficking. Many people don't know this, but it's in fact the 4th largest form of organized crime. And this is after drug, human trafficking, and arms trafficking. It is estimated to be worth up to 69 to just under 200 billion US dollars per year. And in Southeast Asia alone, it has been estimated to be worth up to 10 billion per year. Its economic impact is estimated between 1 to 2 trillion US dollars per year, so that's an extraordinary amount of money. What is important to note is that these types of crime are run by transnational organized criminal networks who are fueled by the big profits and low risks, and enabled, and this has also been mentioned in the previous presentation with Chad, by the high levels of corruption at every stage of the supply chain. So what do we do about it? At the Wildlife Justice Commission, our mission is to help disrupt and dismantle the transnational criminal networks that profit from wildlife. And we do this by collecting evidence and turning this into accountability. In our work, we focus on the most vulnerable species and also the most high-level offenders. So not your poaching level criminals, but really the crime bosses that are behind, the major profiteers that are behind these networks. Targeting these high-level offenders is important to really dismantle and make a significant disruption in these networks versus these lower level, for example, the poaching level I just mentioned, and because those are people that are easily replaceable in the networks. So we work in very close collaboration with law enforcement agencies at the domestic level. We conduct law enforcement-driven and intelligence-led investigations of criminal networks, trafficking, and wildlife. And what should you picture with this? We actually have undercover operatives that pretend to the evidence that they obtain from these operations with our law enforcement partners. We also provide other operational support, such as training and mentoring. What's exciting from the work that I do, because that's explained just now with the introduction, my work focuses on raising awareness at the multilateral policy level, is that I can actually use these findings from my colleagues that work undercover on the ground to inform policymakers at, for example, the UN level, to really highlight what works and what doesn't work and what needs to be done better to effectively address tackling these crime types. We have many active law enforcement partnerships and ongoing activities in the Southeast Asia region, including, for example, Malaysia, Laos, PDR, Thailand, and Vietnam. And I'm really proud to say that we have, we've been in existence for almost 9 years. We have our 10-year anniversary next year. That's something to be celebrated next year. But we've had some really fantastic successes working collaboratively with law enforcement agencies as well as with other NGOs, which include 267 and counting arrests. We've helped dismantle 62 organized criminal networks. We've seized tons of animal products and, more importantly, over 12,000 live animals, which are usually traded, for example, for the live pet trade. And we've provided operational support to law enforcement agencies in 31 countries and have been able to achieve a 100% conviction rate for finalized cases. So, moving on to the next slide. What is the relevant international legal framework to combat wildlife trafficking? So, the existing international legal framework determines the ways in which wildlife crime is perceived and approached. And at the multilateral level, this includes two main approaches. Firstly, conservation-led instruments, such as, for example, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, CITES, and the criminal law approach. Unfortunately, traditional conservation-led approaches haven't been enough to address wildlife crime on the scale and the seriousness at which it is now occurring. So while the law enforcement response has been weak and under-resourced, it has really left high-level criminals and their networks untouched and profitable. The criminal law approach and instruments may penalize wildlife crime offenses occurring in parallel with wildlife trafficking, which is also what has been mentioned before, for example, through ancillary crimes enabling such crimes, such as corruption and money laundering. In the criminal law approach, and you'll see them on the screen, the two main instruments we work with are the United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, the UNTOC, and the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the UNCAC. Now, both these conventions contain important provisions to effectively tackle wildlife crimes and really fight the transnational organized crime elements of wildlife trafficking and prevent and combat corruption enabling such crimes across global supply chains. And what we found from our on-the-ground investigations to be really important provisions that are provided for under those instruments include the use of special investigative techniques, which, for example, are the undercover operations that I was telling you about just now, using intelligence analysis and controlled deliveries, which is, if you go through customs and you see that someone has rhino horn hidden in their suitcase, that you actually let it go through in the hope that you might find out more about the full criminal network. Other important provisions are international corporations, joint investigations to tackle this transnational nature of these crimes, as well as parallel financial investigations to identify the proceeds of crime and also to facilitate asset recovery and address possible money laundering offenses. And these are standard law enforcement methodologies that are used to investigate and to prosecute other forms of transnational organized crime, including drug trafficking and human trafficking. But unfortunately, these provisions are still not evenly applied domestically, and the tools provided by international legislation are not always applied into practice at the domestic level for wildlife trafficking. So now, before diving into some of our main cases conducted in Southeast Asia, I would like to briefly highlight some of the main challenges and opportunities that we've identified through our investigations into wildlife crime cases. So So firstly, due to the transnational nature of wildlife crimes and the possibility for crime to displace across global supply chains, usually to territories that have weaker laws or weaker law enforcement, there is a need for enhanced international cooperation to effectively investigate and tackle wildlife trafficking across the supply chain, including through, again, these joint investigations, as well as intelligence sharing and the use of special investigative techniques. Enhanced partnerships and cooperation between law enforcement authorities and other stakeholders, including civil society organizations like the Wildlife Justice Commission, can also allow law enforcement agencies to keep up with the adaptability and the agility of criminal networks. Corruption has long been identified again as a key enabler of wildlife crime across global supply chains as well. And to go after these kingpins, so the most prolific and high-level offenders, and effectively disrupt these supply chains, it is also crucial to conduct follow-up and financial investigations in parallel to criminal investigations. In other words, what we call to follow the money, as well as make wildlife crime a predicate offense for money laundering and seizing the proceeds of crime linked to wildlife trafficking. Through our work, we've also found evidence of frequent convergence of wildlife trafficking with other forms of serious organized crime, including drug trafficking, fraud, and human trafficking, and maybe linking into the previous presentation with Jenny, we also see convergence between forced criminality, for example, humans trafficked to be forced to poach endangered wildlife. And this provides opportunities for law enforcement, including the possibility to use alternative law enforcement powers, expertise, and legislation to more effectively address this convergence. So moving on to a first case study, which relates to an investigation in Malaysia on corruption in illegal wildlife trade. So this case was conducted in 2023 and actually is still ongoing, where the Wildlife Justice Commission supported the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, MAC, in their successful operation targeting corrupt customs and other members of an international wildlife trafficking network, with the support of another actor, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service based in Thailand. And the syndicate was also believed to be involved in money laundering. 12 suspects, including 2 customs officers, were arrested and charged by the MAC, including the alleged mastermind behind this criminal network. Approximately 1.8 tons of pangolin skills have been seized so far, as well as several luxury vehicles with an estimated value of over $5 million. And well, this really, first of all, underscored the MAC's commitment to identifying and arresting high-level criminal orchestrators and not just the operatives, which I just explained is so important to disrupt these criminal networks. But this operation also showcased the international and cross-sectoral cooperation that is essential to root out people in the private and public sectors who engage in corrupt practices that facilitate these crimes, as well as the importance of seizing assets to effectively disrupt these criminal networks. And then you see these really cute lemurs, unfortunately behind a cage. In the next slide, I always have to think of King Julian. My kids love that movie. So this is, yeah. An example case study of our investigations into the illegal live pet trade in Thailand, which is really quite recent and happened earlier this year in May, where through intelligence provided through our operatives, 7 persons were arrested by the Thai police following the seizure of 48 lemurs, over 1,000 tortoises. Following arrests, even more species were seized at various premises. And these arrests were part of a joint investigation conducted by a number of Thai law enforcement agencies in collaboration with us. The seizure of the tortoises, spider tortoises, is actually the largest reported seizure of its kind in Thailand, and and the largest globally. The seizure of the lemurs is believed to be the largest reported seizure in Thailand. And following this operation, which is also very important to note, 10 confirmed arrests were made at the other end of the supply chain in Madagascar, where these species were trafficked from. And the arrest of these high-level traffickers, coupled with the financial loss that resulted from the seizure, are really expected to have a profoundly disruptive impact on the ability of this organized criminal network to continue their trafficking activities in the short and medium term. It also showcases the importance of making use of existing tools in the international legal framework, such as the joint operations and the international and cross-sector cooperation, which I spoke about, and it is just so key in tackling the transnational nature of wildlife crime. Just as a side note with this, because this was only in the news yesterday, we just heard that an airline has now volunteered to help ship the lemurs and the other species that were seized back to Madagascar, and which should happen later this month. So that's all very good news for the animals that are seized too. Next case study, please. So I'd like to give you a last example, and this is one of the biggest cases we ever worked on in relation to ivory and rhino horn trafficking in Vietnam, which is about a man named Anam. You can see him on the picture. He was a kingpin, a wholesale broker in a transnational organized crime group that trafficked massive quantities of ivory and rhino horn from Africa to China to Vietnam. Our investigation spanned over a 3-year period over 3 countries in Southeast Asia. And this investigation ultimately saw the conviction of 47 people, including Anam, who was convicted to 11 years in prison, where he remains today. And just a note here in relation to your earlier presentation on sentencing, this sentence really sent an important message, which was really that this risk-reward ratio, which I mentioned in an earlier slide in my introduction for wildlife crime, is changing in Vietnam. While this investigation was extremely successful with all these arrests and high sentencing, it did come short in one area, so there was a major lesson learned here. During our investigation, we acquired valuable intelligence into Anam's payment methods that we shared with authorities both in Vietnam and in China. Anam had access to $7 million worth of wildlife products, which is a lot, indicating a humongous flow of proceeds of crime. For example, he and his wife owned multiple properties and luxury cars, as you can see in this picture, and often displayed their wealth publicly as well. So there were multiple entry points to start an investigation into this. For example, the bank accounts that we knew he had and he used for 3 years. But unfortunately, none of these leads were ever investigated by authorities, which we really considered to be a significant missed opportunity, because had these leads been investigated by authorities, the proceeds of the crime might have been identified and assets seized, and we might have gained significant intelligence into the wider who's who of wildlife trafficking in Vietnam and China, and identified other kingpins operating in the space as well. So this case really also shows the importance of financial investigations in cases where there are indications of financial crimes. So before I reach my conclusion, I'd like to share with you encourage you to look at some of the reports that you can see on this slide, where you can find more information and case studies, including many relevant to the Southeast Asia region, in case you're interested. And also we have a podcast series called Wildlife Kingpin, which you should be able to find on Spotify, Apple, Deezer, Buzzsprout, or SoundCloud. But what's really interesting about this is that these series follow our real-life wildlife crime investigations in the Southeast Asia region, and some of our investigators were interviewed for that as well. So one of them is actually also about Anam, so if you'd like to hear more about how that investigation went about, please do check out our podcasts. In conclusion, as highlighted by these case studies, addressing the crime convergence and corruption elements, enhancing international and cross-sector cooperation, conducting these parallel financial investigations are really key in successfully dismantling and disrupting organized criminal networks profiting from wildlife crime. And it's so important that we enhance our efforts to combat such crime, including addressing gaps in legal frameworks before an entire species, because this is what we're talking about, species and ecosystems are about to get wiped out due to this form of transaction organized crime. Because unlike other illicit commodities, our environment is finite. And once a species is extinct or an ecosystem destroyed, there is no reversal. And consequences, again, as mentioned earlier, also reach beyond biodiversity. We always say waiting is no longer an option. Thank you very much. And maybe if you move to the last slide, if you are interested in following us, I'd like to point out our socials on the slide as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been extremely interesting, and with that I will focus on the importance of cross-sector cooperation. And in this regard, I would like to ask you whether you could outline in practice the difference between the roles and responsibilities of law enforcement authorities and the mandate of the Wildlife Justice Commission as part of joint investigation teams. Because you mentioned a number of times that you closely cooperate with law enforcement authorities.
Yeah.
So for me, coming from law enforcement, it's very interesting this whole concept of joint investigation. So it's going to be very useful if you can outline that, of course, from the perspective of the mandate that you have in the Wildlife Justice Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, and it's a very good question. So, of course, as an NGO, we're not a law enforcement agency. And when we operate in and collaborate with these different law enforcement agencies, we do that, well, firstly, in accordance with the law, and secondly, in close collaboration with these authorities. We often have MOUs in place, for example. What I think is the main difference is where we help with undercover investigations. When we conduct them, they're endorsed by local authorities. But where our role stops is we can't arrest accused, right? Because we're not the governmental authority or the state authority. So what we do is we provide the evidence to the local authorities who are then responsible or need to make the choice of what follow-up action they conduct. So they're the ones doing the arrest, conducting the follow-up in operations. But we do assist, for example, with any information they would further need. For example, if they arrest someone and they take their phones, if they don't have the capacity themselves and request this type of assistance, we can help with analyzing those phones. And usually, and that is also one of the main things we see, it's really valuable to invest in intelligence analysis. If you analyze a phone, that might lead you to other contacts that person that you arrested has, so that you can conduct more focused investigations and go after these high-level offenders. So it's a collaborative relationship that we have, but yeah, our role really does stop where the law enforcement actions such as arrests, etc.
Thank you very much.
I would like to revert now to the audience to see whether any of you have questions to our panelists. Oh, man.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, I'm taking advantage of the position in front. So first of all, it's Al Capone. So it's like Al Pacino. He was like, oh yeah. So two things. Okay, so for my first question for Jenny is so a while ago she mentioned that we should not people should not be punished for any criminal activity that they do not consent to. And I 100% agree with that. But I was just wondering, at what point does a person become a criminal, and at what point does being a victim end? Because remember the Dominic Ongwen case, which is an ICC case, and how even if he was raised as a child soldier, he was still given punishment for what he did. So I think that's the crux of my question. So like, when does victimhood end and people have agency and liability to be prosecuted for crimes that they actually have done? And then, for Lisa, can I ask a question now? Just to get it off my chest. And then for Lisa, I think that's really great that you're doing at the Wildlife Justice Commission. I was wondering, so you have this evidence, and so you give it to the law enforcement. But what happens if the law enforcement does not want to take it? Like, do you have any other alternatives, other avenues by which you can take all this body of evidence that you can use in order to do the work, even without the cooperation of the local government authorities, which I can imagine, because they're the ones actually, in a lot of times, they're the ones, I don't want to say it, but yes. So, so these two questions, I'm done. Thank you.
Let's start. I think this works.
Yeah. Thank you. It's actually a really good question because, Chad, that goes back to the origin of the establishment of the Wildlife Justice Commission. Because we were actually established in The Hague, the City of Peace and Justice, in response to the fact that you have all these courts and tribunals that are based here, but none of them hold governments to account where they breach international law where it comes to addressing wildlife trafficking. So, when law enforcement does not cooperate, we do also still technically have within our mandate the possibility to hold a public hearing. And what we've done that once in looking at my colleague in the, I think in 2005, was before I worked with a case in Vietnam, where evidence was provided to the authorities in relation to Nikkei market, which you might have heard of. And for those that don't know Nikkei market, that is a notorious market in Vietnam, where rhino horn and ivory was just publicly being sold, and law enforcement was basically bribed to keep it going. And we held a public hearing here in The Hague in the Peace Palace, where a proper case study was presented, and we actually have an independent review panel, we still do, that served as basically a bunch of judges to consider the case. But what we've found since is that we've not had to use this stick, basically, anymore. So we have had sufficient cooperation with law enforcement authorities in countries where we operate in to take action on the evidence that we provide on cases. But it's still an option.
Thank you. I'm just going to answer on the question for the non-punishment. The way I understand non-punishment, in the concept of human trafficking, there's an element of exploitation, abuse, vulnerability, and threat. So the concept of their help, their willingness to commit crime should be eliminated because they do not have that consent. If they do not agree to participate in the criminal activity, they will get punished, they will be abused, so it will further exploit them to further abuse, further vulnerability. So that's why the concept of non-punishment in human trafficking is quite stern, in the sense that once they are categorized as traffic victim, they should not be punished. On that note, also, I would like to share about there's a recent case on drug trafficking by Mary Jane Veloso. It's from Philippines.
No.
Is it right?
Yeah, familiar. Yeah.
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 She was trafficked to Indonesia
Yes.
while bringing drugs, and she was sentenced to death penalty in Indonesia. But in the Philippines, she was actually recognized as a human trafficking victim, and her perpetrators already brought to justice. But the problem is, as we know, different countries, different legal system, different jurisdiction, one cannot recognize others' court decision. That is why it is really difficult for the Indonesian government. For the legal avenues, all the legal avenues has already been resolved. So basically, there is no way of saying how this case will proceed. But just recently this week, we've read in the news that Mary Jane is coming back to Philippines. It's a sign of good news. Initially, we thought so, but it was only transfer of prisoners. So we still have no clear indication whether the death penalty will still be carried out whether in the Philippines or it will be suddenly just dismissed or something. Thank you. Yes, please.
I had the chance to work with Miss Jenny in the JKA, or Judicial Knowledge Exchange, between the Philippines and Indonesia, under the umbrella of CAPCHI, the Council of Chief Justices, Council of Asian Chief Justices. So, before I pose my question, may I just add on the non-punishment principle of victims of trafficking in persons. If these trafficked persons were required by the perpetrators to do a criminal act, they will not be punished because, as stated by Ms. Jenny, they did not give their consent to such an act. So, in the Philippines, we do not prosecute them. Most often, they are used as witnesses in order for the perpetrators to be incarcerated. So my question to Ms. Jenny is that, first, congratulations, our work in 2023 has now compendium on best practices, which was launched in the Philippines last November 19. It is that the same problem in the Philippines and Indonesia is the execution of judgment, where the fines are very high. Like, for example, in the Philippines, the minimum is 500,000. How can the victim collect damages, and how can the perpetrator pay damages plus fine in the amount of 500,000 pesos? This issue was not resolved during our judicial knowledge exchange. So what's the solution of the Asian Act on that? Thank you.
Judge, you promised me you won't ask. And it was a hard one actually. It's one of the findings that we had during the judicial knowledge exchange that seeking compensation, damages for victims is really hard because even if perpetrators, as I mentioned before, human trafficking is mostly on the transnational organized crime, where it's hard to dismantle the syndicate, so you only get the next best thing. Just a small fish in a whole big sea. So they do not have the capacity to pay all for the damages. They don't know how. And for example, in Indonesia, if they cannot pay for damages, they will. The additional punishment is only 1 year, maximum of 1 year. So sometimes it is easier for them to resort to additional punishment instead of paying for the damages. The Philippines also has similar problems. In terms of ASEAN Act, actually, what we do is we encourage, but we cannot make policy making. We always try encourage the country, the ASEAN member states, to implement their commitment under the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, because the convention clearly mentioned that they need to provide adequate compensation and damages for victims. There's a really good example from Thailand. They have a state trust fund that victim can access. In Indonesia, this is only feasible for victims specific for sexual exploitation cases. Other than sexual exploitation, this is not possible. And it's still a new law, so the implementation is still, we're still waiting on how this will be further implemented. So to answer your question, Judge, from a perspective, it is really crucial that both countries amend their legislation. They need to allow for more state responsibility in order to provide fund for the victims and to provide such fund as immediate as possible. It is true that we need to establish them as a victim in order to provide adequate resources, but if they can access such fund as easy as possible, as fast as possible, it will help them to reintegrate back to the society. Thank you.
like this too. I teach here all the time. So yeah, I'm Freedom and Growth. I teach here international law. And my question is, so the overarching theme, one of the overarching themes I see here is that we are trying to keep up with technology changes and mobility changes, especially in organized crime. They always seem to make good use of the evolution of technology. And we in Europe are in a way fortunate because we have had an answer to this even before the changes became that big, because we opened our borders. And we needed an answer, namely Europol and Eurojust. I think Eurojust is often underestimated also in this context. Europol just sounds cooler, right? Asienapol also sounds, it's the first time I hear of this, but is this not the solution then? Or one of the solutions to the problems that you, especially you two, have been describing, to enable more cooperation? Because I think there's also a big misunderstanding of what Europol does to mostly facilitate cooperation, to really have also small term agreements on who will prosecute. That happens in Eurojust, of course, and who will provide what evidence to whom. These kind of things have to be agreed upon to make it actually efficient to grab these organizations who now operate transnational anyway. And their profit is in operating that way, right? But not just the facilitating aspect is so important, but also I think the knowledge that we have now of how things operate. So my question is, shouldn't you just grab one of the Europol officers and the Eurojust workers from the organization and just feed on that expertise? Shouldn't ASEAN really look into that? And yeah, how realistic is this, especially, where is it just also enlightening the states that this is not interference, this is cooperation, right?
I'm actually not sure how to answer that question. It's a stumping question because I wish it were as easy as that, right? I mean, in real life, okay, let's just give one person or like one specific group of people of the power to go against this environmental or human rights violators. But then unfortunately, a lot of on-the-ground implementation happens in the local. Also, evidence gathering is also on the local. Also, there's also a matter of, I'm not gonna, it would be, jurisdiction as well, but also like where people would like to work on, or what people think cases are theirs. So I think that's also I think in my conception why it's difficult to just streamline all of these powers into one governing body, and this is also why I think it would be, it's not easier, but I think the current system exists as so. But I think Jenny might have a more informed answer on this.
I also think we have to be careful that, speaking of power, because Europol has very limited powers, if any of those institutions, then Europol, but not Eurojust. Very, very limited powers.
Yeah, maybe I can just jump in on this one. I also fully agree with you that cooperation is key, but as Chad already mentioned, it's also an issue of mandate and jurisdiction. Because, as you rightly also outlined, Europol does not have enforcement powers, so we cannot recall and arrest criminals. We provide support to member states and support, let's say, complex joint investigations. And that's also the role of Eurojust as well. And that's why I also think, Jenny, as you outlined, the role of Asian Pol as well. So it's more like a cooperation mechanism than just a European police force and going and enforcing and putting in practice policemen. But a very interesting question, so please feel free if you have something else to add.
Yeah, I think I just want to add that I agree cooperation is key, and one like Europol or ASEAN or any mechanism in ASEAN can provide this cooperation. At the end of the day, it's back to the country because we really need to acknowledge national jurisdiction. So as much as ASEAN can go, and I think we can agree ASEAN really take their time in progressing, and keeping up to date with the current situation. So it's always a baby step with ASEAN, but they're always trying to progress. And I think in my experience, further, as long as we follow the process, they're really open to many ideas. And we have seen they are approving many frameworks, many international practices, as long as we follow the process. For them, it's 60% process, 40% substance. So as long as we follow them, we can open for discussion. And also, one of the key findings that we had during the judicial knowledge exchange we held last year was to have more exchange, not only from the region, but outside the region, because they understand that, for example, in human trafficking, it's a really transnational organized crime, cross-border crime. If it is true that in the current situation in the Southeast Asia region, what we are currently experiencing is honest crime. But in other regions, there must be other trends of human trafficking that we need to be aware of. Just because they're not majorly happening in Southeast Asia doesn't mean they don't exist. And this is something that one of the judges from Indonesia highlighted, that it is crucial to have cooperation between the region, but we need to also open our exchanges to other regions so that we can collaborate more and understand what is happening in the other side of the world. And on that note also, I would really like to take up the offer of having Europol, for example, doing, I don't know, like exchange or resource person to come to the Southeast Asia region and coordinate it as ASEAN-APO, for example, or even with the program that I'm working in.
I think there is also another actor here that maybe is more suitable than Europol because of our very limited mandate, and that's Interpol. And these two organizations, Europol is a new agency, whereas Interpol is an international organization that I believe is more suited for you in order to enhance the cooperation in the region. But I have a question that is related to what has been actually said and the previous question as well. Jenny, you mentioned extensively in your presentation the lack of harmonization. We talk about lack of harmonization when we talk about definitions of crime areas among the countries, with regards to what we consider digital evidence and punishment in the respective Southeast Asian countries. And when you mention that, I draw a link with what we currently are facing here in Europe, and that's basically lack of harmonization when we talk about minimum age of criminal liability. And my question here is, do you know what is there a harmonized minimum age of criminal liability in the region? And how you treat minors? I'm specifically interested in that sensitive and special category of that subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for the minimum age of criminality, it is vary between countries in the region. But what we can, what I can confirm is the age of children. It is agreed between the region that it is under 18. But in terms of minimum age of criminality, they still have different interpretation on the age, and I think that's also one of the issues that we found when we are developing these guidelines on child and forced marriage, on which definition of children and how they can be children, and also how they can be acquainted for consent for criminality.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm a first year law student. From what I heard from you all, first of all, thank you so much for your time. It was very, very interesting. From what I understood, there are a lot of political and legal gridlocks when it comes to basically doing your jobs. Would you recommend up and coming legal professionals to enter the field, knowing how many difficulties there So, what are the ways that we can approach it in order to reach positions that prestigious like you guys have? Thank you.
I'm happy to start now. Thank you so much. Well, personally, from my experience, I can say that yes, we have political issues sometimes, and not everything goes as quickly. Because I recognize also what Jenny's saying about pieces. Same is the case at multilateral level. But I can tell you, when I look and I started off my presentation, some of the operational successes, that is so extremely motivating. I mean, the type of work that we do is just so impactful. Both in terms of animals, in terms of the networks that we disrupt. I mean, that's I think a big yes for you. And in terms of starting a career, I would say keep an eye on our internships. If you're interested, we've had really fantastic interns, and we have a former intern sitting, who's now working in my team, Leah, and we've had excellent interns, including I don't think he went to TUS. We've had many interns from this university, so keep an eye on our internship program. And I think that is a great way to get a better feeling if it's something for you and if you're interested in this type of work as well.
Thank you. I think for me, what I can recommend for you is study and be a good lawyer. I think it's, for me personally, I started as corporate lawyer, so not international lawyer, but my background is international law. So, and I think my days as corporate lawyer really shaped me into drafting. It really helped me on how to draft for agreements, how to draft policy brief, and also it helped me on the negotiation skill. So I think once you're graduating and you still have no idea what you want to do, go get a lawyer, go get a job at the law firm. You can get so many skills there. And then you can decide whether you want to stay there or you want to go to international law or anything. Thank you.
Thank you. I will slightly deviate from your answers. If you value yourself, value your sanity, don't. I don't think lawyering is a profession you do for yourself. At least the kind of lawyering that, the kind of lawyering that a lot of us do, like human rights, environmental rights, it's not something you do for yourself. It's something that you do for other people. So if you have something that you feel strongly about, then yes, work hard, do your best, network. That's the perfect. It's a great job with a lot of dangers, especially depends on which field you work in. So yes and no. So it depends. It's not an answer. It's not an answer I can give for it. It's not the same answer for everyone. But if you reach into your heart and determine why you want to do it, then maybe that can help answer that question. And I think also, and how to, I don't think I have anything prestigious related to me, but I would think that, I think it's really all about taking different sides. Like even in politics, even in law, taking, for example, different political sides and understanding and bridging them together, economics and psychology and law, for example, sciences, all of these things are very important. Knowing how to keep an open mind and listening, learning how to properly listen, I think is a great way to become not only a great lawyer, but also a great person in general. It's someone who can hopefully, little by little, and collaborating with each other, make changes in this world.
I think I have little to add, especially after the last intervention by Chad, but, because I also personally believe that you can always become a good professional, but the most important is to be a good person, first and foremost. The rest comes with experience, hard work, but just like my co-panelist mentioned, just try to put yourself out there as much as possible, because it's very important to gain practical experience. And practical experience you gain via internships. Europe also provides a lot of opportunities. I think that's the moment when we can promote. So whenever the time comes, just apply and don't be afraid of rejection. I think that's also very important to keep yourself sane. Because it's a very tedious process, it's a very hard process, and I also believe that there are very good people out there. So it's quite a competitive space. Hopefully address your question. Any other questions? I think we're perfectly on time. Yeah. I would like to thank you all in the audience and of course our panelists today for the very interesting discussion. It was great having you here and thank you once more to the organizers for the invitation.